and all of that stuff, you know.
Right.
Yeah. So we had to move into a different room, you know, get better lighting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So where I was at was you know, like when I was in California, in the LA area, I noticed it was pretty diverse.
Yeah.
However, most of them are like, you know, what's the word I'm looking for, like stratified.
Right.
Like, you know, Vietnamese only hang around with Vietnamese, Mexicans only with Mexicans, Chinese with only Chinese. Is that true? Or,
you know, it depends. Obviously, if you grow up in a certain community and you don't look for job opportunities or educational opportunities outside of the community, you're going to be in that area. But the people who do go out and get an education or work outside of the community, if they're working in a government office, a company, a factory, you know, whatever it happens to be, they're most likely going to meet people from other cultures and mix, and they have to use English if that's where they're working. So it really depends on the person, but the good thing is that you can taste all these different cultures, you know, and learn these different languages, living in a city and being surrounded by people who speak these languages.
Yeah, and I'm thinking in like a lot of times in like the major cities, you don't even have to go to that country to learn the language. You know, you can just go to a local neighborhood. Yes. Like I'm sure there's like an Armenian neighborhood, right?
Yes, very big Armenian community in LA and Orange County.
Really?
Yeah.
And you know, like some people don't have the opportunity, or you know, they can't afford like a plane ticket all the way to Armenia.
Right.
So they could go to LA or Orange County, you said? Yeah, and you know, they can immerse themselves, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I've been to Armenia 3 times, and the plane tickets are not cheap. So it's much cheaper just to go to Orange. If living in California, it's much cheaper just to go to LA or Orange County. And you know, I meet so many times people in the U.S. who say, "Oh, I'm going to go study Spanish in Costa Rica."
And you know, I wanted to add to that, like about Armenia, and like that general area, Turkey, Armenia. Isn't it like probably like exactly the opposite side of the world from where like California is and stuff? Like probably if you were to go like to China, it would probably be closer, huh? Because all you had to do is like travel.
Well, there's a direct flight from California to China, and it's about a 10-hour flight. I've taken it from San Francisco to Beijing, but to get to, there is actually a direct flight right now from Los Angeles to Istanbul on Turkish Airlines, but then from there you still have to get to Armenia, so it would take longer. But what I was saying before about people being able to learn a language where they are, it's so often I meet people who say, "Oh, I'm going to go take a Spanish class in Costa Rica," and they live in California or Florida or New York, and I'm like, why? Just walk outside your door, take the bus. You know, you have plenty of people you can talk to. You can turn on the radio. I mean, I learned Spanish living in California, and even if you don't have that community around you, if you have access to the internet, you're not living in North Korea. You can use Skype and you can watch movies and listen to music, because I talk about learning languages through music. So this idea that you have to have money or you have to be able to leave the country is false. Absolutely false. So dissuade yourself from any of these false notions that you need money and need to be living in a certain country to learn the language.
Oh yes, and this reminds me of something, and I want to mention is that something that Benny the Irish polyglot said. You guys know. I want to say hi to Benny. Hi. And like Benny the Irish polyglot, he said that actually you don't need to go to the country to learn the language. That's actually a myth or something like that. That also another thing that it actually gets him mad sometimes is that like, you know, some people think that being in the country where they speak the language you're trying to learn, you know, it makes it easier or something like that because you immerse yourself and all of that. In some ways, he said it's a little bit easier, but in a lot of ways, it's not really like what most people think. It's actually harder because if you don't know some of the words before, you know, if you never learned the words before, it's like kind of hard to understand. But like for example, like words like ni hao, you know, probably a lot of people have heard them before, which means hello. Which is in Chinese for hello. And however, you know, you could catch that, but you know, there would be like a lot of other words that, you know, you've never heard in your life and you would have trouble with, you know, or something like that.
Well, Benny uses himself as an example that he was a foreign exchange student through Erasmus, I believe, in Barcelona or somewhere in Spain, and he was hanging out most of the time with other English speakers, I don't know if all from Ireland or from which countries, and he actually didn't learn much Spanish, and he learned more Spanish when he was studying in, you know, outside of a Spanish-speaking country.
Yeah.
And that happens very often. And if you think about all the immigrants in the United States who live in these communities that you're talking about, they can live there 30 years and still not speak English, whereas someone from their country who's been studying the language back at home speak it better than they do.
Yeah.
So that's a perfect example of why you don't have to be in the country to learn the language.
And yeah, that's right. As of recently, you know, I've heard that there's many, you know, Spanish speakers like in Miami, especially like Cubans, many Mexicans like in the Southwest, you know, kind of closer to the border.
Yeah.
And even Koreans like in Koreatown or Chinese in Chinatown, they've lived in those communities for so long that they don't, but yet they don't know any English or hardly any English because, you know, in their communities, they don't really need it, you know, there's just mostly in their language.
Yeah.
And in a way, you know, I think that's kind of very limiting or something like that, you know, it's sometimes we need to get out of our comfort zone or something like that.
You
really
always have to get out of your comfort zone.
We always have to, yes.
Yeah.
We have to definitely experiment, try new things. And actually we had a talk earlier, right? Last night you said something about even if you sound really, really stupid or make mistakes or whatever, it shouldn't matter. The important thing is that you're trying, isn't that right? When you're learning a language?
It's true because first of all, even native speakers make mistakes. We've had heads of state, but I'm not going to name any names, but we all know who I can be talking about, who have made mistakes in their own language. And, you know, in order to learn a language, you do have to make a mistake. You have to fall, just like when you're learning how to walk when you're a kid, you're going to fall. That's just the process. Yeah. I've made a fool of myself all the time, and I still do, and it doesn't stop me from continuing.
And yeah, you know, I think probably mistakes are actually something good. You know, it's something that helps you grow.
Yes.
Like if you have, it lets you know that something's wrong and you can correct it.
Yeah.
Definitely, yeah, because well, so sometimes also being if you're a perfectionist, you know, you can probably learn a language, but it's going to be a lot more harder. It's going to be a longer process. Well, at least in my opinion, don't you think so?
Right, because you're not going to talk, so
yeah, exactly.
It's going to be a longer process because what is it going to take for you to open your mouth and talk?
Yeah, exactly. And I have a feeling maybe some people have the thought that probably just opening a book and reading from front to back is going to help them learn a language like Chinese, Korean, Spanish, Russian, I don't know, Afrikaans. And, you know, just like trying to memorize all the vocabulary, but that's not a very good process, or do you think it is, or not very good?
I think it works for a very small minority of people, but the reality is that that's not the way we learn languages. We don't learn just from a book when we're kids. It's a multi-sensory experience. You learn what snow is when you go outside and it's cold and, you know, the snowflakes are right on you. And when you learn just from a book, that's only one way of learning, is just reading and repetition.
Yeah.
And you need to learn by listening, through music, watching TV, talking to people. But also, I do have to admit, people sometimes misinterpret what I say, and they think, oh, Susanna says you can learn languages just by listening to music. That's not true. You do need to learn the structure of the language, and for that, you need a book or a class or something where you're learning the structure. So you need a combination of all different inputs in order to learn.
Oh yeah, and well yeah, like by what you mean by structure is that you mean you have to at least know some of the basic grammar points and some of the key words like behind, below, in front of, right, left, yes, no, if, and, or. Yeah, like those are key important words, right?
Well, they are key important words, but you need to know much more. You need to know the structure. For example, you know, in Spanish you put the adjective after the nouns. You say la casa verde, whereas in English you say the greenhouse.
Yeah.
So before you start speaking, it's important to know, okay, where am I going to put these words? Now, you may pick that up instinctively by listening to the language, and you might just start repeating things and not realize that, oh, okay, I'm putting the adjective after the noun. But if you're not picking up on those clues instinctively, then you definitely need to read the book or get some sort of instruction. You know, some people can learn grammar by listening to it. That's not the way I learn grammar. I learn through reading. Whatever works for you is the way that you're going to pick it up.
Oh yes, and you know, one thing that I think is actually a very good method as well is once you're like at a kind of like intermediate, even low intermediate level or high beginner, I think it's a good idea to like immerse yourself watching movies, you know, listening videos that are related to things that you like or that you're interested in. I don't know, like different people like different things. If you like pets or whatever, you could watch a Chinese documentary on cats or dogs or something, right?
Right.
Or well, if you're learning Chinese, of course. If you like, I don't know, cars, you can look at something in French in cars, you know, about cars or something. I'm pretty sure there's also a ton of movies and like video games that have the option to at least put subtitles or dubs into various different languages. Isn't that right?
I'm not familiar with video games, but for sure with movies. And also there's the website Viki where you can you know, see film clips in different, and people subtitle in different languages. Yeah, it's true. I mean, for example, one of the ways that I helped improve my Portuguese was by listening to a Brazilian podcast from the Brazilian National Radio CBN. And the podcast was called Caminos Alternativos, and it was all about alternative health and yoga and meditation. And I was interested in the subjects, and I already knew some of the concepts. So when I was listening to the podcast, it wasn't hard for me to understand things, even if I didn't know the right words, because I already knew the context. And that was free. Got it on the internet.
And also, like, say when you're reading a book or watching a movie in that target language you're learning, like, say there's like 25% of the words you don't understand, or 30%. Do you think that's fine, or do you think the person needs to get back to learning more of the language, you know, in grammar books or vocabulary or whatever, you know?
It depends on what your goal is, because if you're just interested in maintaining where you are and you just want to read for fun, let's say you're at the gym and you're reading a magazine in Japanese or something like that, you're not going to be at the gym with the dictionary at the same time as you're reading. So you're just doing it as maintenance, and if that's fine with you, do it. Now, but if you want to improve, then of course you need to find reading material or whatever, audio material or videos that are going to challenge you.
Yeah, and you know, one thing that I find it interesting is that language learning. I kind of learned slowly throughout the years that it's not just about learning it. You know, there's also the maintenance process.
Yes.
And if you don't, you know, at least keep learning or keep reviewing some of the stuff you learn, you can actually lose it. You know, it's either use it or lose it.
Yes.
And also, like, it even happens with your native language as well. It can happen. And it's very hard for me to believe, but, you know, I've seen cases of that happen, you know. And I've also, well, sometimes even like in my own native language, there are some words like in Spanish that I wouldn't know. So I just sometimes substitute in English or something. But, you know, even though I really hate it, it's bad. But sometimes, like at the moment, I cannot find that word I'm looking for. So sometimes what's best is to, like review some of the keywords you learned, or learn new words every day, or learn new grammar.
And one of the things that I think really helps with maintenance is, for example, just listening to the news in that language. Because if you've already heard the news in your own language, let's say English, and you're listening to the news in Japanese, even if you're not actively, you know, writing down the words, the new words, you're still listening to them, and you're going to process them, because the next time you hear the news, you're going to hear the same word again, and it's going to stick in your head.
And you know, one thing that is really nice is that once you see a lot of videos like news or documentaries or movies, or hear a lot of music, you know, you'll actually hear a lot of the same keywords over and over. Well, by what I mean by like keywords is, like I said, like if, and, or, in front of, you know, to left, to right, you know. Am I right? Like,
of course, you know, a lot of the times the words that are repeated in songs are all romantic words, which you might not use in your everyday life, depending on what you're using the language for.
Yeah.
So, you know, if that can't be your sole source of vocabulary.
Yeah, of course.
It's very limiting.
Yeah, of course. And also it depends on the situation. If you only learn like legal terminology or stuff related to politics or formal stuff, and you just want to say hi to friends or whatever, sometimes maybe it's not so good, right? Because, you know, like sometimes it's good to learn a few slang terms in your target language, something equivalent to buddy or pal or whatever. It doesn't have to be really bad words, but, you know, something like I said, like buddy, pal, dude, what's up? Yeah, you know, am I right or no?
Well, it depends. You know, if you're using it for a formal, like, professional setting, then you want to learn your
yes. Yeah, of course. Yeah, like if you are wanting to become like a diplomat or you want to work for the United Nations, I don't know, and you're learning stuff from, you know, like American rap music, it probably isn't a good idea. Yeah. Right?
You know, I taught ESL at a high school in San Francisco for new immigrant kids, and there was this Mexican student who lived in a foster home with African American kids, and he was listening to a lot of rap and hip hop music, and that's how he's learning English. His English was excellent. He had a great accent. And one time he said, "Hey, teacher, do you feel me?" And I said, "What?" And, you know, I'm like, in hip hop music, that works. You don't say that to your teacher. Because I had to explain it to him in Spanish. I'm like, do you know what
probably wrong setting, right?
Don't say that to your teacher. So you really have to know what you're saying and be careful. And that's why it's good to talk to a native speaker. And native speaker can tell you, know what, this song has a lot of slang which you've never used in everyday life.
Yes.
You need to pick a different song to listen to.
So yeah, it is true, really. Like you know, there's different words for different situations and stuff like that. And, you know, everything has its time and place. But yeah, like also also in Spanish, you know, like there's a little bit of a difference between like you know, formal and casual language. You know, you can even see that in some of the pronouns, you know, like tú and usted, and sometimes it also depends on the Spanish-speaking country. What I've noticed is, like, the Colombians, they tend to use usted a lot. They're like very formal, and like sometimes in other Spanish-speaking countries, it's very nice. It either comes off as like being really nice, or like really distant or something. You know what I mean? Yeah.
It's important to know, and you may be offending somebody without knowing it. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Well, when I was a kid and I used to refer to my parents' friends in the informal tense "ты" in Russian, my parents got so mad at me. So I almost went to the extreme of, in Spanish, always referring to people who are older than me as usted. And some people are like, "No, I'm not that old. Don't call me usted." But I figured, you know what? I might as well be very cautious and have somebody correct me rather than offend somebody.
I think it's still a common practice that, like in Spanish, we still say like usted to like older people, and also don or doña to the really older people. I think it's like 50 and over, or 60 and over, something like that. And I don't know like any English equivalents to don or doña. I think sir and madam or something.
But how often do you ever hear anyone say sir?
Well, not so much. No. And madam, I've heard even less, actually.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very common.
Yeah. So, and
it's 9:30. So
9:30.
9:30.
Yeah.
Okay. And one more question or two I wanted to ask is about regarding languages. I feel like sometimes like languages are actually a living thing, and you know, each language has a different personality. And I actually also saw one of your videos that you mentioned that pretty much it's a good thing to save some of the especially endangered languages, because it's a way of creativity. It's you know, they have their own personality, their own identity, or something like that. Do you think that's true, that each language has its own personality?
I definitely think so, and that's actually something I'm going to speak about this afternoon, about saving endangered languages. I feel like I have a different personality in each language I speak. Now, my personality in that language can be different than your personality in that language. And it's not to say that we all have like this multi-personality disorder if you're a polyglot, but there is some aspect of that. And I think that the thing with endangered languages is that if we lose the words that have been encoded in those languages for centuries, we're losing the knowledge of the world around us, because there are words that exist in one language that don't exist in another. And especially if you're talking about native cultures, indigenous cultures, who've been using like plants in their area for medicinal use, they have words for these plants which we don't have in English, or these words don't exist in other major languages. So if we lose those languages and we lose the people who are familiar with that habitat, we lose access to this knowledge that has been around for centuries. And that's, I think, even more important than the personality. But definitely, each language makes you think in a different way. And the more you activate your brain, the more you're helping yourself stay healthy. Your brain is healthy. And you can delay Alzheimer's. That's super important. I mean, if there's one reason to learn a language, it's to keep your brain active.
Functioning, yeah, of course. And one last thing is, what was the question? Like pretty much, I don't know if you saw this recent article. I think it said that you know the world's happiest languages. What is it like?
Brazilian Portuguese and Spanish.
And Spanish, yeah. And even the one that was at the very bottom of the list, it was still like around 60-40 or 65-40, which is like 65 on the positive side, on the happy side, and then the rest on the negative side or something. And that one language at the bottom was Chinese or something. But they were actually saying that in the end, actually all languages and in all human cultures, that we're more leaning positive than negative. That it's actually like an evolutionary characteristic or something like that. And we've learned to just express words, that like powerful adjectives and words of joy, like hug and I like you, and fabulous, extravagant, stuff like that. Have you read that recent article?
I did read that article, and I don't speak Chinese, so I can't attest to the happiness of Chinese, but I don't think Russian was too high on the spectrum of happy languages. And I think it does have to do with the language itself, but it's more so the culture and the environment. If you're living in a country that has a lot of winter, well, most likely you're not going to be as joyful as somebody who's speaking Brazilian Portuguese and who has a much milder climate. But I definitely think that I'm happier when I speak in Brazilian Portuguese than I speak in my native language, which is Russian. So I can attest to some of that.
Oh, okay. So probably a lot of that would have to do to like certain adaptations in like the climate or environment or something like that.
And the culture, for sure.
Culture,
I do find Russian culture to be much more antagonistic and negative, and not nurturing. Whereas I think,
but it's probably more analytical, more logical, or something like that. Am I right?
Yeah, but also much more antagonistic.
Oh, really?
Much more antagonistic than Brazilian culture and a lot of Latin American cultures, which are much more positive. And I think, if you think about how you feel in that language, in the Russian culture, I feel like I have to prove myself. Prove myself because of the antagonism and because of this kind of preconceived notion that the other person might be wrong. Whereas I think in Latin America, it's much easier to communicate without feeling like I'm always being judged. But that's also a cultural thing, and because I'm from the Russian culture, it's different. Now, if I were a foreigner, maybe it wouldn't feel the same way.
And so now that you mentioned this, I've heard also stories about culture shock and even reverse culture shock, which I found even more interesting. Like, for example, you being a Russian American, have you ever like talked with other Russians and they've said you have like a different personality or something, or like when you speak with them or converse with them or something?
No, I haven't had that. I feel it myself.
But like, for example, I have one of my professors from last semester. He's from Hong Kong, and he's of Chinese descent. And he said in his culture, people tend to not speak a whole lot. It's only mostly like saying what is needed to be said. Things like opinions or affections or something like that is not very valued. It's also kind of embarrassing to express that. But however, he's grown up. Well, he's pretty much grown up here in America, and you know he's actually been to Hong Kong, and he kind of felt a different vibe. And he's actually even had some of the people from Hong Kong tell him that, you know, he's a little bit more lively and he kind of talks more or something like that. Since he said that it must be him, that he's lived in America for so long or something. Have you ever felt like that? Or?
Yeah, it's not so much what people have told me. I just noticed that I censor myself more when I speak in Russian. Compared to how I speak in other languages, you know, especially English. And yeah, it hasn't been what people have told me, it's what I realize myself.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I think we're going to conclude this interview. Yes. And it was a pleasure to meet you, Susanna.
And thank you, Antonio, for inviting me here. It was really quite a treat to realize that my videos are seen by people who, you know, that invite me to come and speak at their university.
And in places you didn't even know existed.
I did not know Pocatello, Idaho existed. Now I do because I'm here.
Yeah. Well, see ya.
Bye.